Kristen. I'm currently a grad student at the University of Michigan School of Information, but I'm also a software developer. And today I'm going to talk about growing developers, or how you can help junior developers improve and succeed. So I got into development a little bit by accident. So when I first started, there was definitely a lot of the fake it till you make it mentality. Nowadays, I like to think I mostly know what I'm doing. So I'm going to talk about some things that help me get from point A to point B. But before that, I'll talk a little bit about my background. So back when I was a young undergrad college student, I actually thought I was going to become an architect. That clearly did not happen. I ended up also at the University of Michigan doing a program called informatics, which was kind of this weird hybrid thing. I did some programming, some statistics, but I was really most interested in that bottom ring, and I thought I was going to go into user experience research. So about a year after I graduated from undergrad, I did find a job at a company. They were building this new product and thought it would be good to do some UX research on it, find out how they could make it better. So I moved to DC to start this job. About 2 weeks in, they come back and say, actually, what we really need you to work on is front-end development. So I quickly had to change gears and became a front-end developer. Did that for about 6 months, to the point where I was, starting to feel comfortable with what I was doing. They come back to me again and say, what we really need you to do is back-end development. So in the span of 6 months, I kind of switched from user experience to front-end development to back-end development. And I've been doing that for the past 4 years. So I'm going to talk about a few things that have helped me through that process. So the first thing I would say is creating a good environment. When I started this job, I was I was just out of school, and I definitely was not experienced in development, so it was interesting to be joining a team where everyone else had a lot more experience than I did. Also, in addition to that, I was one of 2 women on the team, and I was also about 10 years younger than everyone else. So, when we were sitting in team meetings, it was me and a bunch of middle-aged men. But somehow, despite that, the team was super welcoming, and they made me feel like I was just as much a part of the team as everyone else, which was super important. Also, even though I was newer and was maybe at first working on some simpler tasks, they still made it clear that they valued my contributions. They still praised me for, even figuring out these smallest things, which was good and made me feel good about my skills. And they also made an environment where I felt safe to take risks and fail. I know that if I had gone into the office every day worrying about what my coworkers were thinking of me and worrying that they were going to be mad at me if I screwed something up, I would not have performed as well as I did. So that was very helpful. And I know culture right now is kind of a big buzzword, but really I think it is super important, and it can lead to better results. So after that, provide support. So a couple ways that I found that were helpful is code reviews. So obviously, one of the purposes of code reviews is to make sure that bad code is not getting into production. So from that perspective, it's a good way to correct mistakes and learn from failures. But I also found that it was helpful when my coworkers would point out in code reviews if I wrote something that they really liked. So when I first started, I used Ruby on Rails. When I first started coding, 2 of the things that I was really, really bad at was, 1, I never wrote tests for my code. I always forgot to do that. And I also put a lot of code and a lot of logic in the views, which you really shouldn't do. So at first, when I would do these things, other developers would comment on my code saying, hey, maybe move this out of the view. Here's a better place to put this code. Or, hey, I see that you forgot to write tests. Can you maybe go back and add those? Then on the flip side, when I actually started to, ingrain those mentalities and started to do those things, it was just as helpful to see from them comments like, oh, this is a really good method that you included in this model. This is a good place to put that. Or for them to say, I really like this test, and it's a great job of testing that the code that you wrote. And it can be as simple as just putting a thumbs up on something. Even last week, I was writing some code, and I added tests, and one of the other devs put a thumbs up. It's been 4 years, and I still appreciate it. And I think that a lot of times we think of code reviews as more individual feedback, someone giving feedback just on something that I wrote and how I can improve it. But another thing that I found helpful was when one of the other junior developers did something that someone thought other people could learn from, they would take that and they would share it out with everyone else. They wouldn't just give individual feedback to one person and have only them improve. They would take that and kind of, get all of us together and say, hey, this person did this, and XYZ is a better implementation. So here's just something that you guys can all think about in the future. So that was really helpful. Another thing is pair programming. The way that I kind of learned Ruby was I got thrown into it. So I was figuring a lot of stuff out as I went, which is kind of how I learn best. So I was just plugging away at tickets almost right away. But what was really helpful was when I did get to a point where I got stuck or Stack Overflow couldn't help me, pairing with another one of the senior developers, even if we didn't finish the ticket together, just having someone to bounce ideas off of, or maybe see where certain files were in our code base or how things were organized, that was a great resource that kind of helped me build confidence and learn how to problem solve from people who had a lot more experience than I did. And then another thing is to acknowledge achievements. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the code reviews. When someone does something good, acknowledge them for that. It helps build their confidence and then makes them, maybe perform better, helps them remember that, hey, this is a good thing that I want to do again. And finally, mentorship. So this is something that I actually wish I had seen a little bit more of in my current job. Coming into the tech world without having really planned on it, it's this whole big community that I, had no idea what is out there. I had no plan of where I wanted to go in 5 years, 10 years. And I think it would have been really beneficial to have, someone that was dedicated to helping me figure that out a little bit more, just so that I could get more involved, not only in the workspace, but outside of it. And then finally, monitoring progress and goals. So talking about goals more than once a year. I know that this is something that often comes up in an annual performance review, talking about what you've accomplished that year as well as what you want to accomplish the next year. There have been a lot of times where, I've talked about this and then, 2 weeks later you forget about it and you don't remember again until the next performance review when you think, oh yeah, I wanted to get this done and I totally forgot about it. So talk about goals, keep them in mind so that you can actually work towards them. And I think a part of that is identifying concrete ways that you can go about meeting them. Not just having a broad idea wanting to get better at coding or wanting to learn a new skill. Identifying specific and actionable ways that you can go about doing that, whether it's going to a conference or working with a certain person on your team who maybe has those skills that you want to develop. Just figuring out how exactly you're going to go about meeting those goals. And then finally, just providing time or funding to help do that. I know a lot of times we get busy at work, so this is kind of one of the first things that kind of is on the chopping block. It's this would be great. I want to learn this new skill, but I just don't have time. So making sure that you actually provide the space so that you can go through and meet your goals. Sorry, that went a little bit faster than I thought. But that is mostly what I had, so I don't know if anyone has any questions.
I'd like to argue with you about the purpose of a code review.
Okay.
I think the lowest priority in it is keeping bad code out. And it really is about feedback. Mm-hmm. I mean, your first code review, for me, it felt like I was standing naked in front of my entire team, and they're ready to point out everything that's wrong. But, if it's done well, those things you talked about are what happened, right? That you get the pointers of, hey, go do that test. All right, I'll go do it. And when you do something well, it goes out to the team. And a lot of times, if you participated in them, you're learning from what you're seeing up there, and you're learning from when this person says, go write that test, I go, I guess I should go write my test too. And they really are a feedback mechanism more than kind of the harsh, you're going to put bad code into our system.
Fair enough.
But even code reviews on somebody that's senior putting their code out there so that the junior people can say, hey, why did you do it that way? Or could it be done this way? And then you say, well, it could, but it's better this way because of this. So you get more of an understanding of the code.
Yeah, sometimes the whys are more important than the whats.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Did you have, so you mentioned mentorship, did you have a mentor, and what did that look like? Or what do you think a mentorship should look like? Like, what are the activities that you think would be helpful?
Sure. I guess in a way I kind of think of most of my coworkers as mentors just because they have a lot more experience than I do. But I kind of wish that I had a more, formalized relationship. Just have someone that is there to proactively check in. Kind of a problem that I was facing when I was just getting started was that a lot of times I would be afraid to ask too many questions or afraid to bother people that are working on other tasks because I didn't want to pull them away from what in my mind is some super important thing that they're working on. So I think it would have been nice to have someone that was there to kind of be more proactive about checking in with me as well, and just to have someone to continue to build that relationship and that comfort with. To know that I could go to them if I had any problems or, wanted support or wanted to learn more about a certain aspect.
Do you think it'd be helpful to have designated times on a certain frequency to check in?
Yeah, and
what would that timeline look like?
I think it probably depends a lot on the individual, and is maybe something that would happen more frequently when you're just starting out, but can be more sporadic once you kind of get a little bit more comfortable. But maybe starting with something weekly and then moving out to bi-weekly or monthly.
Do you think your weekly check-in with your managers can be a replacement for that?
I guess for me specifically, my manager has usually been a PM,
Okay.
So they weren't necessarily in the same role as I was. So those kind of check-ins tended to focus more about the work, and they didn't necessarily understand as much of the day-to-day tasks that I was doing.